didn't come here to fall apart. But when you've spent 22 years being someone else's everything, it's hard to remember who you were before the silence. The ocean was beautiful. That was the worst part. It shimmered, endless and alive, like it hadn't noticed I was quietly disappearing. I sat alone on the balcony, legs pulled up against my chest, watching the waves blur into sky. This was supposed to be healing. This was supposed to be the kind of place where people found peace, warm, lush, forgiving. Instead, I felt like I was being exiled by paradise itself. The room behind me was quiet, too quiet. I hadn't turned on the TV in 3 days, wine helped, but only in the way that softens the edges without fixing anything. My name is Alina Rayner, I'm 46. And I don't know who I am without the man I married at 24 and divorced at 45. He got the house. I got the ocean. He got to keep his life intact. I got to sit in a luxury resort trying to convince myself that freedom wasn't just another word for loneliness. I'd done the beaches, the hikes. I even tried paddle boarding for exactly 12 minutes before pretending I twisted my ankle. None of it made the weight in my chest feel lighter. I wasn't grieving him. I was grieving the version of myself that once believed things would always get better. That version had died somewhere between year 12 and year 19 of our marriage. But I hadn't noticed until now. It's strange. You can surround yourself with beauty and still feel invisible. Each night fell the same way. I poured a glass of wine, scrolled through channels I didn't care about, and listened to couples laughing on balconies below me. Their joy sounded like a language I'd forgotten. And no matter how many sunsets I watched, I couldn't feel anything but hollow. Then came that morning, the one I decided I had to do something different, even if it was meaningless. So I walked down to the resort bar just after it opened, figuring maybe the world would feel more real if I sat somewhere with noise. And there he was, back turned, wiping the counter like he owned the place. Tall, tanned, effortless. Something about him made the room tilt. It wasn't attraction, not at first, it was the way he looked like he belonged. While I was still wondering if I deserved to be seen, he turned, he caught my eye. And in that single moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was noticed. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I exhaled. I didn't come here to feel nothing. But that's what it felt like, nothing. The ocean stretched out in front of me like a postcard, blue, endless, impossibly calm. I sat on the balcony of a room I paid too much for, my bare feet pressed against the cool tile, a half-empty glass of wine resting beside me. The breeze brushed my skin, soft and warm like a secret. And still, nothing. They say Hawaii is paradise. They say it heals people. But how do you heal when you no longer believe you're worth saving? My name's Alina Rayner Ellie. To the few people left who still bother, I'm 46, recently divorced. And if I'm being honest, which I've learned to do more often these days, I don't recognize the person I've become. For 22 years, I was a wife, a mother, a woman who put everyone else first. Now, I'm just a woman with no clear purpose, sipping wine in a room meant for honeymooners. I thought this trip would fix something, that the beaches, the sun, the quiet would melt the years of exhaustion clinging to my bones. But peace doesn't come when you pack your pain in your suitcase and expect a new view to erase it. I had done the things, the guided hikes, the snorkeling, even yoga at sunrise. I had smiled for photos I would never look at again, pretended the salt air filled some kind of void. But when the nights came, when the lights dimmed, and the couples around me slipped into laughter and intimacy, the ache came back stronger. I missed being touched, not just physically, though God, it had been so long, but truly seen, acknowledged. I missed hearing someone say my name like it meant something. Loneliness is quiet, but the longer it stays, the louder it gets. That morning, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still pale, a soft blue curtain rising over the edge of the ocean. I told myself I'd try again, do something, anything. So I threw on a sundress, ignored the mirror, and walked down to the tiki bar. It was nearly empty. A few tired faces nursing hangovers, a couple of early risers reading travel brochures. And him, he stood behind the bar, towel in hand, moving like he had all the time in the world, tall, toned, shirtless, save for a pair of well-worn board shorts. His skin carried the color of someone who belonged to the sun. His hands moved with casual ease, like everything he touched agreed to be better. I shouldn't have stared, but I did. He turned, and our eyes met just for a second. But in that second, something shifted. He smiled, not the kind you give strangers, not fake, not forced, something real, a little crooked, a little too knowing. I looked away fast, heart stuttering like it wasn't used to being noticed. What was I doing? He was young, far too young, beautiful in the way that made women like me invisible. He probably had girls chasing him every day. Why would he look twice at a woman like me? But the smile, it lingered. I took a seat at the bar, trying not to fidget. He walked over, casual as ever, and leaned in just enough for me to feel it. "What can I get you?" he asked, voice low and easy, like he was offering more than just a drink. I blinked, tried to sound steady. "A margarita, just simple." He nodded, already mixing, hands moving like second nature. His eyes flicked to mine as he set the glass down. "Jessie," he said, that same smile returning. "Nice to meet you, Ellie." The name felt unfamiliar coming out of my own mouth. He nodded slowly. "Ellie, good choice on the drink." I laughed before I meant to, and something in my chest cracked just a little. "So," he said, wiping the bar in front of me, "what's a woman like you doing here alone?" It should have stung, but it didn't. He wasn't mocking, just curious. I shrugged, trying to remember who I am. He paused just for a second, then smiled, softer this time. "Hawaii's good for that." Maybe it was. Or maybe I just needed someone to say my name like it mattered. And in that moment, Jesse did. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because I had plans, just because I couldn't stop thinking about the way he said my name, Ellie, like it wasn't heavy, like it didn't come with decades of silence behind it. I wandered the gardens of the resort with a cup of coffee in hand, letting the warmth of the mug ground me. Everything around me was lush, too green, too perfect. Birds I couldn't name called out from branches heavy with flowers. And beneath my feet, the stone path was slick with dew. I tried to focus on the moment, breathe, be grateful. But all I could think about was his smile and the strange way it had stayed with me, like the echo of a song I hadn't meant to memorize. Jesse. It wasn't just the way he looked. It was the way he made me feel present. And for a woman who'd spent years feeling like background noise in her own life, that was dangerous. By the time the sun started to climb, I'd talked myself out of going to the bar again, and then talked myself right back into it, twice. In the end, I let my feet decide. And somehow, they took me straight there. The tiki bar looked exactly the same, but it felt different. Maybe it was the way my breath caught as I stepped into the light, or the way I scanned the bar for him before even realizing it. He wasn't there. I sat anyway, ordered a pineapple juice from a woman with a high ponytail and kind eyes, tried to look like I had a reason to be there. Then, just as I was about to leave, he walked in from the side path, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, towel draped over one shoulder. Our eyes met again, and there it was, that same smile, like he'd expected me. He walked over without hesitation, leaning casually against the bar. "Morning," he said, voice lazy, teasing, "back for another margarita before noon." I smiled despite myself. Tempting. "But no, just juice today," he nodded. "Pacing yourself smart." His presence was effortless, unbothered, like gravity bent a little differently around him. "You come to Hawaii often?" he asked. "First time," I replied. Figured I'd finally do the cliché. Woman leaves her husband, finds herself on an island. He chuckled. "How's that working out?" I paused. He waited. And somehow, the truth didn't feel too heavy to say. "I thought it'd feel like a fresh start," I said. "But so far it just feels quiet." He didn't laugh, didn't try to fill the silence. He just nodded. Sometimes quiet's the part before everything changes. I looked at him then, really looked. His face wasn't just attractive, it was open, present, like he actually listened. We talked for another 10 minutes. Nothing deep, just island food, weird tourist habits, the worst sunburn he'd ever seen. But something settled inside me, not peace exactly, but pause, like I'd been running so long I didn't realize I needed to sit still. "You working every day?" I asked. Before I could stop myself, he smiled. "Pretty much, but I like it here. The ocean doesn't ask much of you." I nodded slowly. "I think I need that right now, something that doesn't want anything back." He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes, soft, maybe even sad. Maybe you're not meant to give anything right now. Maybe you're just supposed to feel. His words stayed with me as I left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to, and he didn't watch me go. But I knew when I walked away, I'd be back. By the third afternoon, it had become a routine. I would wake just after sunrise, watch the light spill across the ocean like someone painting in real time, try to convince myself I was doing this trip right. Then, around the same hour, just when the sun grew bold and the air turned soft, I found myself wandering toward the tiki bar again. I told myself it was the atmosphere, the open air, the breeze. But the truth was simple. It was him, Jesse. He wasn't always behind the counter when I arrived. Sometimes I had to wait, sip something cold, and pretend I was there for the scenery. But eventually, he'd appear, sometimes carrying boxes, sometimes laughing with a coworker, sometimes just moving with that unbothered grace that made him look like the island had chosen him personally. When our eyes met, he always smiled, not a big, showy grin, just that half tilt of the lips, like he was letting me in on a private joke. It did things to my pulse I hadn't felt in years. He remembered my drink. After the second visit, he didn't ask, just poured. And the first time he said, "One for Ellie," out loud, like it was the most natural thing in the world, I felt something catch low in my chest. "I should tip you better," I said once, trying to sound playful. "You're starting to know me too well." He leaned on the bar, arms crossed. "I think it's called good service." "I think it's called dangerous," I replied before thinking. He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Dangerous, huh? Been called a lot of things. That might be my favorite." I laughed, but my cheeks flushed. I wasn't used to this kind of banter any more light, easy, without the weight of history. Jesse wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't trying to solve anything. He was just there, listening, asking questions, making me feel less like a ghost. That afternoon, the bar was quiet. The resort was half asleep in the heat, and most guests had retreated to the shade or the sea. It felt like the world had slowed down just for us. Jesse leaned against the counter, drink in hand, not for me, but for himself. "I have a theory," he said. "Oh," I took a sip. "Let's hear it." "People don't really come to Hawaii for the views," he said. "They come to forget, or to remember. Either way, it's about what they left behind." I paused. "Which one are you?" He smiled into his glass. "I live here. I'm the backdrop." I shook my head. "That's a lie. You're too alive to be background." His eyes flicked to mine. There was something unreadable in them. And suddenly, the air between us felt a little too still. "I think I was just tired of not being seen," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Jesse didn't flinch. He didn't rush to respond or fill the silence. He just nodded, slow and steady. "I see you, Ellie," he said, soft, simple, but it landed in me like thunder. He went back to his work a moment later, as if he hadn't just said the one thing I didn't know I needed to hear. And I sat there longer than I meant to, long after my drink was gone, long after the breeze picked up, trying to hold on to the feeling that, for once, I wasn't fading into the background. The invitation came casually, like he wasn't aware it would echo in my chest for hours. "You ever try surfing?" Jesse asked, tossing a towel over his shoulder as he polished off the last drink order of the afternoon. I blinked. "Is that a serious question?" He grinned. "Everyone should try once, even if they fall." "I'll skip the humiliation, thanks." "Humiliation's half the fun." I rolled my eyes, but part of me smiled, actually smiled, not politely, not out of habit. I hadn't planned to say yes. But an hour later, I found myself at the edge of the beach, barefoot, the sand warm under my toes, and Jesse holding a longboard like he'd just stepped out of a travel commercial. There were others there, young, fit, bright-eyed. I felt like someone's mom accidentally wandered into the wrong class. But Jesse treated me like I belonged, like I wasn't an outlier, just another body here to meet the waves. He gave instructions, demonstrated the stance, laughed when I tried to mimic him, and nearly fell over in the sand. "You're doing great," he said, reaching out a hand to steady me. The contact was brief, but it was real, and it lit something in me that had been quiet for a long time. We walked into the water. The board bobbed beside me, awkward and slippery, and my nerves were louder than the surf. Jesse stayed close, guiding, patient. And when I climbed onto the board and immediately toppled over, I was the one laughing first. Not a tight, strained laugh. A real one, full and breathless and surprised. Salt burned my eyes, my hair stuck to my cheeks. But I felt something rise in me, something warm and silly and wonderfully alive. I looked up at Jesse, who was smiling, arms crossed as he stood in knee-deep water. "See," he said, "falling's not so bad." I shook my head, grinning. "No, it's not." We stayed there, just floating for a while. He told me about growing up on the mainland, how he came to Maui for a summer and never left, how he liked the way time moved slower here. I told him about Oregon, the rain, the cold house I left behind, the silence that grew so loud I had to leave before it swallowed me. He didn't say much after that, didn't try to offer wisdom or advice, just listened, like that was enough. When the lesson ended, he walked me back to shore, hand at the small of my back for balance. I didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Something in me had softened. Or maybe something had just come back online, back at the resort. We parted ways with a wave and a shared smile. I watched him walk toward the bar, his silhouette framed by the gold of the late sun. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was restless, but because I could still hear him laughing in the water, still feel the way his hand steadied me, still remember the way it felt to laugh like nothing was broken. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, and whispered one quiet truth into the dark. I don't want this to end, even if it's nothing, even if it's only this. The days began to blur. Each morning, I walked the same path along the shoreline. Each afternoon, I found myself at the bar without meaning to. And each time, Jesse was there, like he'd been waiting, like he already knew I'd come. We talked more now, about the music he liked, the food he missed from home, how he preferred quiet mornings over crowded nights. He never pushed, never asked about my past unless I offered it up in pieces. And even then, he handled those pieces like they were fragile. It was dangerous. How easily he disarmed me. How quickly I started looking for him in every quiet moment of my day. He wasn't just a bartender anymore. He was becoming a rhythm in my life, a familiar voice in a world that still felt uncertain. One evening, I caught myself adjusting my dress before heading to the bar. Just a little mascara, a touch of lip gloss. It wasn't about vanity. It was about being seen by him. That night, the resort glowed under a soft orange sky. A few guests lingered near the pool, the murmur of conversation low and lazy. I found Jesse at the far end of the bar, setting up for the night. He glanced up, smiled. "Ellie," he said, like a note that settled easily into the space between us. I took my usual seat. He poured the margarita without asking. "You always this consistent," he teased. "Only when something's worth repeating." His brow lifted slightly, amused. But there was something else in his eyes, something warmer, something that hovered. I sipped slowly, letting the silence between us stretch into something safe. Then, without meaning to, I asked, "Do you always flirt with the older women who come here?" Jesse froze for half a breath, then laughed low, easy. "No," he said, "just the interesting ones." I rolled my eyes, trying to brush it off, but my heart thudded too loudly behind my ribs. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'm serious. You think I talk to every guest like this? I think you're very good at making people feel special." "Maybe," he said, "but you are." It was reckless, too bold, too much. But he didn't take it back. I looked at him, trying to find the edge between honesty and charm, trying to tell if this was real or just a fantasy I'd let myself believe. "You don't know me," I whispered. He didn't flinch. "You let people believe that, but I think you're more open than you realize." His words landed in a part of me I'd buried. And suddenly, the air felt thinner, like it couldn't hold the weight of what I wasn't saying. I should have changed the subject, should have laughed it off. Instead, I asked the question I hadn't meant to voice. If I wasn't leaving soon, would this be different? Jesse's smile faded just slightly, not cold, just careful. "Maybe," he said. And that was enough to undo me. I stayed longer that night, not because of the drink, not even because of him, but because I didn't want to go back to a room that felt quieter now than it ever had. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at me like I mattered, and I wasn't ready to let that go. The ocean was quieter at night, no tourists, no children with plastic buckets, or sunburnt couples sipping cocktails, just the wind, the surf, and the hush of everything I hadn't said yet. Jesse walked beside me, barefoot, holding his sandals in one hand. Neither of us had spoken in a while. We didn't need to. The moon hung low over the water, soft and silver. The sand beneath our feet still held the warmth of the day. Every now and then, our arms brushed, and each time I felt it like a spark. We'd started the walk after the bar closed. He'd asked if I wanted to see the beach at night. I said yes, knowing I shouldn't, but wanting to more than I'd wanted anything in a very long time. So, he said finally, voice low, like he didn't want to wake the waves, "Are you glad you came here?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. It's not what I expected, but maybe that's the point." He looked at me, not the way people glance, but the way they hold on. "What did you expect?" I smiled sadly. "A miracle, a reset, some kind of clarity." "Did you get it?" "No," I said, then added, "but I met you." The words surprised me, not because they weren't true, but because I'd finally said them out loud. Jesse didn't speak right away. Instead, he stopped walking. So did I. The waves rolled in, pulling back with a whisper. He turned toward me, brushing a hand through his hair. "I don't know what this is," he said. "I don't want to pretend I do, but it feels different with you." I nodded slowly. My throat felt tight. Everything inside me wanted to step closer. Instead, I asked, "Why does something that feels good have to be so complicated?" His mouth twitched into a crooked smile. "Because the good stuff usually is." I laughed once, too quietly. Then we just stood there, and the distance between us felt suddenly unbearable. I didn't think. I stepped forward. He met me halfway. We stood so close I could feel the heat of his skin, the rhythm of his breath. But just before anything more could happen, he pulled back, only an inch, but enough. "I can't," he said, voice rougher now. "Ellie, I have a girlfriend." It hit like a cold wave, sharp, immediate. I looked down at the sand, at our footprints side by side. Of course he did," I nodded, the air suddenly heavy. "I shouldn't have said anything," I whispered. "No," he said quickly. "I wanted to be here. I wanted this walk. I didn't want to lie." I forced a smile. It didn't reach anything in me, but I gave it to him anyway. "Thanks for being honest." He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. We started walking again, slowly, not touching, not laughing. And when we reached the path that split back toward the resort, he stopped. "Good night, Ellie." I looked at him. Everything in me wanted to ask for more time, more explanation, more anything. But all I said was, "Good night, Jesse." Then I turned and walked alone into the dark. The next morning, I didn't leave my room. The curtains stayed drawn. The coffee went cold. The ocean, so loud the day before, felt distant again, like I'd been pushed out of its rhythm. I told myself it didn't matter, that I hadn't expected anything, that it was better to know the truth before getting in too deep. But it wasn't true, not really, because I had wanted more, even if I never said it out loud, even if it was foolish. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The dress I wore was simple, not revealing, just hopeful. A quiet part of me still wanted to be seen, not for attention, but for the soft, aching need to be wanted, just once, without compromise. I walked back to the bar. It was late, quieter than usual. The air carried the scent of sea salt and citrus, and the lights above the bar flickered gently like stars that hadn't made up their minds. Jesse was there. He looked up when I arrived. No smile this time, just a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or something heavier. I sat down. He wiped the counter, as if searching for words in the motion. I didn't give him time to find them. "I'd like a drink," I said, then paused. "And your company," he stilled. I know what you said," I interrupted. "I remember every word. And if it makes you feel better, I'm not asking for anything beyond tonight." He swallowed. I saw the hesitation, the guilt, the weight of choice pressing down between us. But I also saw the flicker of want, the same one that had lived in his eyes since the first time we met, the one we'd both tried to ignore. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to be," I whispered. "I just don't want to go back to my room and pretend I wasn't here, that I didn't feel this." The silence stretched, then slowly, he came around the bar, each step deliberate, measured. His hand reached for mine. And when our fingers touched, something inside me exhaled. We didn't speak, not as we walked across the quiet resort, not as we passed other guests, or the flicker of candlelight on tables. Not even when we reached my door inside. The air was still, heavy with everything unsaid. He turned off the lights. The room fell into a hush, lit only by the pale glow from the balcony. And then, gently, like the tide slipping over stone, the distance between us dissolved. There were no words for it, only the pulse of breath. The slow unraveling of the spaces we had guarded for too long. No urgency, no conquest, only presence, only warmth. Time didn't stretch, it stilled, wrapped itself around us like something sacred and brief. And when our hearts finally slowed, when the world returned, soft and quiet, I felt the truth settle in my chest like an aftershock. This wouldn't last. It was never meant to. But for one night, I wasn't alone. And that was enough. I woke before the sun. The room was quiet, heavy, with the hush of something sacred having passed through. Outside, the horizon was just beginning to glow, soft streaks of lavender and gold brushing the edge of the world. Jesse was still asleep beside me, his breath slow, steady, a rhythm I could feel in my bones. I lay there, unmoving, letting the stillness wash over me. There was no regret, only the weight of knowing this moment was not built to last. I didn't need it to. The night had not been about promises. It had not tried to dress itself in forever. It had only asked us to be present, to forget everything but the language of skinless closeness, of warmth, of breath, of soul meeting soul beneath a silence too full to name. Something in me had softened, or maybe bloomed, not like a wildfire, not like an explosion, but like spring pressing gently into frozen ground. A quiet miracle. We hadn't spoken much. Words would have cheapened it. but the way his fingers brushed my wrist, the way our hands found each other again and again, as though to say I'm here, had spoken in a language older than logic. The space between us had vanished, replaced by something weightless, not lust, not fantasy, but a pull, an orbit, like the stars had realigned just to let us forget who we were outside that room. Eventually, he stirred. I didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt it when he turned to look at me, when the quiet stretched into goodbye, and neither of us knew how to say it without breaking something. "I shouldn't have come," he said, voice hushed. "I know," I whispered, "but I'm glad you did." He nodded once, then slipped out of bed, gathering his things in silence. No kiss, no promise, just a glance before the door clicked shut behind him. And still, I didn't cry, because what we shared wasn't a tragedy. It was a gift, a night that asked for nothing but truth and gave back something I hadn't known I needed. I stood by the window as the sun rose, watched the light chase the darkness from the ocean's surface. Inside me, something had changed, not everything, but enough. Enough to remind me that I was still capable of feeling, of wanting, of choosing myself, even when it hurt. And in the quiet that followed, I breathed in the morning air, salted, new, alive. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to begin. Last night had already begun and ended, and that was enough. I didn't see him the next day, not at the bar, not on the beach, not even in passing. And I didn't ask. Some part of me understood that silence was its own kind of kindness, that after a night like that, words would only bend the truth into something it wasn't meant to be. The island carried on. Tourists laughed by the pool. Children dragged sandy towels through the lobby. Couples held hands beneath frangipani trees, like nothing in the world could touch them. But I moved through it all with a softness I hadn't known I could feel again, like the ground was lighter under my feet, like I was no longer walking through fog. Something in me had shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to remind me that I still existed. That night, I packed my suitcase, the same one I'd unpacked with trembling hands 2 weeks earlier. Back then, it had held the weight of failure now. It held something different, not victory, but something quieter, resolution. I folded each dress with care, smoothed the fabric like ritual. And when I reached for the sandals I hadn't worn since that first walk to the bar, I paused, held them, then set them aside, let them stay. The sun was setting as I stepped out onto the balcony one last time. The sky stretched wide and golden, like it was trying to make room for everything I couldn't say. I sipped my final glass of wine, didn't toast, didn't cry, just breathed. A knock came at the door just as the light began to fade. I opened it slowly. There he was, Jesse. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly damp, like he'd just showered, and still didn't know what to say. We stood in silence for a long moment, no tension, just a kind of knowing. "I wanted to say goodbye," he said quietly. "Okay," I replied, just as softly. He looked at me like he wanted to memorize something, not my face, but the moment. "I don't know what last night meant," he said, "but you reminded me who I used to be." I swallowed. It landed somewhere between my ribs. "Same," I whispered. "You reminded me that I still feel." He nodded. His eyes were glassy, but he didn't look away. "I won't forget you." "You don't have to," I said. "You were never mine to keep." He gave me a sad smile, one I would carry with me longer than I probably should. And then he turned, walked down the hallway, and didn't look back. I closed the door behind him, pressed my back to the wood, and breathed. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't, not like before, not like regret, just the ache of something beautiful ending, and the quiet strength of letting it go. The flight home was quiet. I sat by the window, forehead resting lightly against the cool pane, watching clouds drift past like slow thoughts. Beneath them, the Pacific stretched on unbothered, unknowable. No one sat beside me. No one needed to. I had entered that plane with a strange kind of peace tucked inside me, not the kind that comes from resolution, but the kind that follows a single, undeniable truth. I had felt something, and I had let myself feel it fully. I opened the small journal I'd barely touched since arriving. The pages were mostly blank, save for a few shaky lines written my first night there. I turned to a fresh one, took a breath, and wrote, "I used to be someone's wife. Today, I begin being mine." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't profound, but it was mine. When the plane landed in Oregon, the sky was overcast, the trees damp with early rain. But I didn't flinch at the gray, not the way I used to. I moved through the airport slowly. No rush, no need to chase or flee. Outside, the air smelled like wet pavement and pine. I breathed it in like memory. There was no one waiting for me, no arms, no reunion. Just the hum of engines and the quiet click of my suitcase wheels as I walked forward. But I didn't feel alone, not in the way I had before, because I carried something now, not Jessie, not the night we shared, but the version of me that had come alive in his presence. She had laughed, she had risked, she had opened, and I wasn't leaving her behind. Back at home, the silence was familiar, but I no longer feared it. It was a space I could fill, not with noise, but with choice. That night, I unpacked slowly, hung my dresses with care, placed the journal on my nightstand like an offering. No calls came, no messages. And I didn't check, didn't wait. I went to bed early. Let the quiet wrap around me like a second skin. And as I closed my eyes, one truth settled deep and certain in my chest. He wouldn't call. And I didn't need him to, because for one night, I had remembered who I was. And that memory was mine to keep.